My husband chose his mistress over me while I was pregnant. The divorce hearing changed everything. My husband handed me a settlement folder when I was 7 months pregnant and told me to sign it because, in his words, I wasn't built for a fight like this. He wasn't wrong. I wasn't built for a fight. I was built to win one quietly, with paperwork, the same way I'd been winning quiet fights my whole life. 19 minutes into our divorce hearing, a judge asked my husband a single question about a document he apparently didn't remember signing 6 years earlier. He went pale before he could answer it. That document had my name on it the entire time, and neither he nor his mother had ever bothered to read it twice. Welcome back to Dark Revenge. If this is your first time here, this is the channel for real, true-to-life stories about the people who underestimated someone they thought was easy to push around. Cheating husbands, cold mothers-in-law, greedy in-laws, family money nobody thought they'd ever have to share, and the calm, legal, unglamorous ways those people eventually lost. We post a new story here every single day, so if any part of what I'm about to tell you sounds familiar, go ahead and subscribe now, because you're going to want to be here for the next one too. This is mine. My name is Claire Ashworth, though I've started using my maiden name again, Whitfield, and I'll get to why. I'm 32. I'm a CPA in a town called Brentwood, Ohio, the kind of place with one real main street, a grocery store everybody knows by name, and a courthouse square half the town's grandparents got married in front of. For 7 years I worked at a regional accounting firm downtown, doing tax compilation and small business bookkeeping, the unglamorous kind of accounting nobody puts on a vision board. I was good at it. Clients liked me because I read the footnotes other accountants skipped, and I never once, in 7 years, missed a filing deadline. I drove a 2017 Honda Civic with 94,000 miles on it even after I got married, because old habits don't leave just because your last name changes. My husband, Marcus, drove a brand new pickup truck his mother had basically gifted him through the company. That difference tells you almost everything you need to know about the marriage before I even explain it. Marcus's family owns Ashworth Development Group, a mid-sized real estate and construction company that's put up a good chunk of the subdivisions and strip malls in our county over the last 30 years. His late father, Harold, built it. His mother, Vivian, has run it since Harold died, with Marcus as vice president, technically being groomed to take over, though anyone who spent 5 minutes in a room with Vivian understood she had no real plans to let go of anything. I met Marcus through work. My firm handled Ashworth Development's outside compilation, and he was the one who brought me coffee at 9 at night during a file review that ran long. He was easy to like, charming without trying too hard. For 8 months, we dated quietly, mostly because Marcus didn't want to deal with his mother's opinions about it yet, which should have told me something too. Our first Thanksgiving as a married couple, Vivian rearranged the place cards after I'd already sat down, moving me from beside Marcus to a seat at the far corner near the kitchen door, and when I asked, lightly, if I'd sat in someone's spot, she smiled and said, "That's just where the newer additions sit for a year or two, dear, it's tradition." It wasn't tradition. Marcus had been bringing girlfriends to that table for a decade, and none of them had ever been seated by the kitchen door. I let it go, the way I let most things go that first year, because I told myself Vivian just needed time. I didn't understand yet that with Vivian, time was never the thing that was missing. Permission was. To understand why I didn't fall apart at that dinner table when it finally happened, you have to understand where I actually come from, because it wasn't anywhere near Ashworth money. My father left when I was 7. Not dramatically, no scene, no slammed door I can remember. He just stopped being at breakfast one week in October, and my mother, Patricia, told me he'd moved to Columbus for work, which was true for about the first year. After that it was just true that he was gone. My mother worked mornings at a diner called Ruby's on 4th Street and cleaned 2 dentists' offices at night, and we lived in half of a rented duplex on Larkspur Lane with a kitchen too small for 2 people to stand in at once. I learned to read a receipt before I learned cursive. My mother kept a green spiral notebook on top of the refrigerator where she tracked every grocery trip down to the dollar, and by the time I was 9, checking her math against the receipt was just something I did, the way other kids did chores. Once, when I was 11, a red notice came taped to our door, and I took it down and hid it in my backpack before she got home from her shift, not because I thought I could fix it, but because I didn't want her to walk in and see it first thing. I don't know what that says about an 11-year-old. I know what it built. My mother's rule, the one she said so often it stopped sounding like advice and just became a fact of the house, was this: cry if you need to, but do it after the bills are paid. Not because feelings didn't matter. Because panic never once made a bill smaller. I didn't know yet, at 11, hiding a rent notice in a backpack, that the exact same habit, stay calm, get the paperwork in order, deal with the feelings later, was going to be the thing that saved me 21 years after that, in a courtroom I hadn't been born into yet. In 7th grade, I entered a county math competition mostly because it came with a $20 gift card to the grocery store, and I remember sitting at the kitchen table afterward, laying the card down next to the green spiral notebook like it belonged there, like it was one more entry in the ledger instead of a prize. My mother taped the certificate to the refrigerator, not because it impressed her, she told me later, but because it was proof that paying attention paid off, eventually, in ways you couldn't always predict at the time. I didn't fully believe her back then. It took me until I was 32, sitting in a courtroom with a folder full of somebody else's mistakes, to understand she'd been right the whole time. Marcus and I got married in June, 5 years ago, at the Brentwood Historical Society Hall, because it was what we could actually afford without his mother's help, which was very much the point. Vivian gave a toast at our engagement dinner the year before that I still remember almost word for word. She raised her glass and said she was glad Marcus had found someone who understood what it meant to appreciate what a family like theirs had built. It sounded like a compliment if you weren't listening closely. I was listening closely. 2 years into the marriage, when Vivian's longtime accountant retired, I took over Ashworth Development's outside tax and compilation work myself, as a paid contractor, completely separate from being Marcus's wife. Vivian agreed to it, I think, mostly because it was cheaper than hiring a stranger and because it meant she could keep an eye on what I saw. It was during that engagement, the year Harold's estate finally finished closing, that his lawyer restructured the company's LLC paperwork for tax purposes. Reviewing the new operating agreement for my own compliance work, I noticed something small. A 7% non-voting membership unit listed under my name, described as compensation in lieu of fee for ongoing family CPA services, per a directive Harold had apparently left before he died. I asked Marcus about it over dinner one night. He shrugged and said something like, "That's just a tax thing Dad's lawyer set up before he passed. Don't worry about it." Vivian, when I mentioned it separately, called it a nice little recognition of your bookkeeping, nothing more. I believe both of them. I filed the paperwork, kept a copy for my own records out of professional habit, and didn't think about it again for almost 3 years. The thing that actually changed everything was a positive pregnancy test on a Tuesday in October, taken in our bathroom on Willow Court before either of us had left for work. I remember exactly what Marcus said when I came out and told him. Not congratulations. He said, "That's, wow, okay." And then he checked his phone. I told myself it was shock. I told myself a lot of things that fall. I didn't understand yet that the quiet wasn't shock. It was arithmetic. He was already doing math I hadn't been letting on. By December, 7 months pregnant would still be 4 months away, but the small things had already started stacking up in a way the accountant in me couldn't stop noticing. Marcus's phone, which used to sit face up on the counter, was suddenly always face down, and the passcode changed twice in 6 weeks. Site visits started running until 9 or 10 at night. On evenings I knew the crews clocked out by 5. Doing laundry one Sunday, I found a key card in his jacket pocket from a place called the Lakeview and out on Route 9, and when I asked, he had an answer ready fast. A client meeting had run long. He'd crashed there instead of driving the 40 minutes home. It would have worked, except our trucks were still synced to the company's fleet tracking app from an insurance discount program, and that app showed his truck never left the office parking lot that night. At the company holiday party in early December, I watched a new marketing coordinator named Brianna Cole laugh at something Marcus said and touch his arm doing it, easy and familiar in a way that 8 months on the job doesn't usually earn. What struck me more, honestly, was Vivian. Vivian, who had never once in 5 years invited me to be in a family Christmas photo without an obvious calculation behind it, had her arm around Brianna in 3 separate pictures that got posted to the company page. Then, closing out December's books at my kitchen table, I found an $18,000 disbursement to an entity called Cole Marketing Consultants, LLC, on top of Brianna's normal payroll. The registered address, when I looked it up out of pure professional habit, was a mailbox rental store on Route 9. I didn't confront anyone. I just started photographing statements onto my own phone before I filed them, the way I'd learned to check a receipt before I could write in cursive. A friend from the firm, Dana, who did payroll runs for 3 of Ashworth Development subcontractors, mentioned almost in passing at lunch that she'd seen Marcus's truck at the Lakeview and twice more that month, not once, and asked, carefully, if everything was okay at home. I told her it was fine. I wasn't ready yet to say it out loud to anyone who might repeat it before I understood what I was actually dealing with. I want to be honest about something. Nothing I had at that point was proof of an affair. It was a pattern, and patterns are not evidence. But by January, 7 months pregnant, and increasingly unable to ignore what my own numbers were telling me, I did the only thing that had ever actually solved a problem in my life. I got organized. I pulled the Ohio Secretary of State filings on my lunch break at a library computer, not my own, and confirmed that Cole Marketing Consultants LLC had been registered 3 months earlier with Brianna Cole listed as the sole member. I found a family law attorney 2 counties over, a woman named Renata Okafor, and paid for the first consultation in cash because I didn't want to showing up on a joint statement before I understood what I was actually looking at. Renata told me to start a dated log of every incident, however small, and I did. A plain composition notebook, nothing dramatic, just dates and facts. She's the one who asked me to bring in every piece of paperwork I had from the company, including that 7% membership unit from 3 years earlier. I remember her going quiet reading it, then asking me twice if I was sure it had never been revoked. It hadn't. Renata explained something I hadn't fully understood, even doing the company's books for years, that a non-voting membership unit still makes you a legal member of the LLC, not just a wife with an opinion. It's a completely different category of person under the law, one that exists independently of a marriage and doesn't disappear just because a marriage does. If money was moving out of that company toward an entity connected to an affair, and I was a documented member being kept in the dark about it, that wasn't only a divorce issue anymore. That was something else entirely. I kept a folder. Blue. Plain, no label anyone would look twice at, the kind of thing you'd assume held mortgage paperwork. Inside it went the LLC filing for Cole Marketing Consultants, copies of the bank statements showing the disbursements, the Lakeview and key card in a sandwich bag, a printed screenshot of the fleet tracking data from that night, and my own copy of the 2021 operating agreement with my name on Unit 7. I kept going to Sunday dinners at Vivian's. I kept being pleasant. I wasn't preparing for a fight I might lose. I was preparing for a version of this where nobody would get to say I made any of it up. Real quick, if you've made it this far, you already know the kind of story this channel lives for. Family that shows its real face right when you're most vulnerable. Drop a comment right now with where you think this is going. I read every single one, and stick around, because what happens at that dinner table is only the beginning. It happened on a Sunday in early March, unseasonably warm for Ohio, the kind of 60-degree day that tricks everyone into leaving their coats in the car. I was 7.5 months pregnant. Marcus asked me to come to his mother's house on Chestnut Ridge a little early, just to talk, which should have been my first flag, because Vivian was never present for just the 2 of us conversations unless she'd arranged to be. She was sitting at the head of the dining table when I walked in, and next to her sat Grant Feld, the family's longtime attorney, a leather portfolio squared in front of him like a place setting. There was no dinner on the table yet. That told me almost as much as anything that came after. Marcus started, and to his credit he at least tried to sound gentle about it. He said he'd been unhappy for a long time. He said he was seeing someone, Brianna, he actually said her name, and that he hadn't wanted to say anything during the pregnancy, but he couldn't keep pretending anymore. Vivian jumped in almost before he finished, saying that given the circumstances, a clean, generous settlement now would spare everyone, especially the baby, a long, messy legal battle later. Grant slid the folder across the table toward me. Inside was an offer, a lump sum of $75,000, the furniture from the house on Willow Court, and one paragraph, in small clean font, where I would waive any claim, financial or otherwise, present or future, to Ashworth Development Group or any affiliated entity. Marcus said, "I know this feels like a lot right now, but you'll be taken care of. This is more than fair." Vivian, folding her hands the way she does when she thinks she's being kind, said, "Family businesses are complicated, dear. It's cleaner this way for everyone. And then, because she couldn't help herself, she added, you always understood you were the numbers person here. Not really part of what we built. I didn't cry. I want to be honest that some part of me had braced for that table my entire marriage, some younger version of me that had grown up hiding rent notices, and she was ready to fall apart right there on Vivian's good tablecloth. But the version of me sitting there at 7.5 months pregnant just folded the settlement papers closed without signing them and set my hand flat on top, the way you'd hold down a napkin in the wind. Then I asked one question calm, the same tone I use asking a client to explain a deduction. Whose idea was the March 2nd transfer to Cole Marketing Consultants? Nobody answered right away. Marcus's face changed first. Not guilt exactly. More like watching a man realize the floor he'd been standing on wasn't where he thought it was. Vivian's polite expression held for about a second longer than it should have. I stood up, thanked them for having me, said I'd have my attorney reach out, and drove myself home to Willow Court with the windows down because the March air actually felt good for once. They thought they'd handed me an ending that night. What they'd actually handed me, without meaning to, was the last piece I needed. The weeks after that were quiet in the house and loud everywhere else. Renata filed a formal response, discovery opened, and the reveals came the way they usually do. Not all at once, one document at a time. Text messages, preserved through the carrier once discovery compelled it, showed Marcus and Brianna had been involved for 14 months, not the recent unhappiness he described at the table. Bank records showed the $18,000 I'd found in December was only the start. Over 10 months, $340,000 had moved into Cole Marketing Consultants LLC, labeled as brand consulting fees, despite Brianna having 0 prior clients, 0 portfolio, and a marketing background that consisted of 1 part-time internship out of college. Renata's associate, digging through emails obtained once my status as a company member gave standing to request them separately from the divorce, found a message Vivian had sent a friend the year before Brianna was even hired, saying Marcus needed someone more suited to the business, someone who actually understood what we're building. She'd met Brianna at a Chamber of Commerce mixer and personally suggested she apply for the marketing coordinator opening 2 weeks later. One more piece came in almost by accident. Brianna, it turned out, had once but dialed a colleague at the office during an argument with Marcus, and the colleague, uneasy about it for months, finally handed the saved voicemail to Renata's office once she heard through the grapevine that a real case was being built. On it, Brianna can be heard telling Marcus that she was tired of being the secret line item, her words, and that he needed to handle Vivian and figure out the Bridgepoint paperwork before the baby came, not after. It was 31 seconds long. It did more work in that case than almost anything else in the folder because it proved, in their own voices, that the timeline Marcus had described at that dinner table simply wasn't true. The biggest reveal, though, was a filing dated 47 days before Marcus officially filed for divorce. Paperwork drafted, though not yet finalized, to form a new entity called Ashworth Bridgepoint Holdings, listing Marcus and Brianna as the only members, structured to receive 2 active development contracts currently held by Ashworth Development Group. 47 days. That's how long they'd apparently believed they had before I'd suspect anything at all. They were off by about a year because the folder in my closet already had most of what they thought they were still hiding. The moment that changed the whole shape of the case happened during a pre-trial mediation session in April, in a conference room that smelled like the same burnt coffee every mediation room in that building smells like. Grantfeld argued, calmly, that the business was entirely separate property, built by Harold and run by Vivian, completely outside the marital estate, and that I had no legitimate claim to any part of it beyond standard spousal support. Renata slid a single document across the table, the 2021 operating agreement, and asked Grant to confirm whether he was aware his client's wife had been a documented, active, non-voting member of Ashworth Development Group LLC since that year, holding a 7% unit that had never once been revoked, and that under the agreement's own terms, removing a member required unanimous consent of all existing members. Grant went still for a second too long. Marcus, next to him, said that was just a tax thing my dad set up. It never actually mattered. And Renata said, calmly, it mattered enough that it's still on file with the state 6 years later, Mr. Ashworth. I sat there and thought about something Harold had said to me once, at a company barbecue the summer before he died, when I was still just the accountant Marcus was quietly dating. He'd handed me a plate and said, "This family runs better with someone around who reads the fine print, Claire. Don't ever stop doing that." I'd taken it as a compliment about my job. Sitting in that mediation room 6 years later, I understood it might have been something closer to a warning he'd left behind on purpose for exactly this. A dying man, quietly making sure that no matter what his son did later, or what his wife wanted, someone in that family would always be holding a receipt. The formal hearing happened on a Thursday in May, 3rd floor of the Brentwood County Courthouse, in front of a judge named Alvarez, who read faster than anyone I'd ever watched read a file. I wore a plain gray blazer that no longer buttoned over Nora. She'd been born 3 weeks earlier, and I brought the blue folder, now 3 folders in a binder, and set it on the table in front of me the way you'd set down anything ordinary. Judge Alvarez asked Marcus directly whether he'd been aware his wife held a documented ownership interest in the company since 2021. Marcus said, I knew there was some paperwork. I didn't think," and didn't finish the sentence. He'd gone pale by the second word. Renata walked the court through the timeline without raising her voice once. The 14 months predating the claimed unhappiness, the $340,000 diverted through Cole Marketing Consultants, the Bridgepoint filing 47 days before the divorce, and a forensic accountant's valuation putting the company at roughly $4.1 million, with just over $1.2 million of that improperly steered away from it in the year leading up to the filing. Brianna sat 2 rows behind Marcus in the gallery, in a blazer that still had the fold lines in it, and didn't look at him once the voicemail was entered into the record. Vivian sat perfectly straight through all of it, the way she always did, but I noticed, somewhere around the valuation testimony, that she'd stopped taking notes on the legal pad she'd brought in, the one I recognized from the company supply closet. There was no shouting. Nobody threw anything. Nobody screamed across the courtroom the way it happens in movies. The consequences were quieter than that and, honestly, worse for them because of it. The court ordered the Bridgepoint transfers unwound and folded back into the company's valuation for purposes of the settlement. I was awarded equitable distribution reflecting both my marital share and the separate value of my 7% membership interest, bought out at fair value, $612,000 total, once everything was added up. Not a lottery number, just an honest one. I kept the house on Willow Court, the one Marcus and I had actually bought together, completely separate from anything Ashworth. Given the documented pattern of concealment, I was named Nora's primary residential parent, with Marcus getting standard visitation once he completed a parenting class the court required. Marcus caught up to me in the hallway afterward. He said, "Claire, come on, we can talk about this." I looked at him for a second, and I wasn't angry anymore, which surprised me more than anything else that day. I just said, "I already did the math, Marcus. I always do." Then I walked to my car. Nora was born on a Wednesday in April, 6 pounds 9 ounces at Brentwood Memorial, and the person holding my hand in that room wasn't Vivian. It was my mother, Patricia, who drove up from her place on Larkspur Lane still smelling faintly of coffee from her shift, because some things don't change even when everything else does. I used part of the settlement to leave the firm I'd worked at for 7 years and open my own small practice downtown, Whitfield Financial Group, using my maiden name on the door for the first time in 5 years. Most of my clients now are women and small business owners who come to me before a big decision, not after, before the wedding, before the partnership, before they sign anything with someone else's name already on it. I tell all of them some version of the same thing. Read the paperwork. Keep your own copies. It sounds unglamorous, because it is. It's also, in my experience, the entire difference between losing everything and keeping what's yours. Dana, the friend from the firm who first mentioned the truck at the Lakeview Inn, is Nora's godmother now. My mother comes over most Sunday evenings, and we don't track grocery receipts against a notebook anymore, not because we couldn't, but because we finally don't have to. Some evenings, after Nora's asleep, I sit at my own kitchen table with actual quiet in the house instead of the careful, managed quiet I used to mistake for peace, and I let myself think that somewhere down the road there might be room for something new in my life too. I'm not in a hurry. For the first time in a long time, I don't have to be. It's been a little over a year now. Marcus sees Nora every other weekend, polite in that careful way people get once a court is watching. Vivian hasn't called once, not on Nora's birthday, not on Christmas, and I've stopped waiting for it to bother me the way I once thought it would. I heard through people who still talk to people that Ashworth Bridgepoint Holdings never actually launched, and that things between Marcus and Brianna have been strained ever since the money got complicated. I don't say that with satisfaction, just as a fact, the way I'd note the closing figure on any file. I don't hate either of them anymore. Most days I don't think about them at all, which is its own kind of ending. What I know now, 6 years after a dying man told a girl he barely knew to keep reading the fine print, is that some people mistake calm for weakness right up until the paperwork proves otherwise. Nobody handed me anything in that courtroom. I just refused to sign what I hadn't read, one more time, the way I've been taught to do since I was 11 years old on Larkspur Lane. So here's what I'll leave you with. If someone in your family only started being generous the moment they realized you might actually have something worth taking, would you have caught it in time? And once you did, would you have stayed calm long enough to build the case, or would the anger have gotten there first? Tell me honestly in the comments. I read all of them. If this story hit home for you, that's exactly why Dark Revenge exists. Every day, we bring you real stories about the people who came for someone's peace, someone's money, or someone's family, and walked straight into the one person who was quietly ready for them. If you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and do that now. Hit the like button, so this reaches someone who needs to hear it today, and share it with anyone who's ever been told to just sign the paper and stay quiet. We'll see you in tomorrow's story.